Hello, everyone, and welcome to Magma Ragers episode 27. I am Dib, and I am joined here by Zamok. How are you doing,
Hello.
Zamok?
This is good. This is actually our first episode that's just you and I, so
Yeah,
it'll
yeah.
be interesting.
It has
Never
been
done this before.
it's been a while since you've actually been on the podcast. It's been a little bit more infrequent. I mean, you weren't on last episode, were you?
No, I was on the episode before, but before that I was
Yeah,
on off quite a bit.
yeah,
So
yeah. Anyway, so the main things we want to discuss tonight are firstly just some more thoughts about the meta as we're learning a little bit more about it and getting a little bit further into Knights of the Frozen Throne. And the other major talking point was the Hearthstone Global Games, which happened over the weekend at Gamescom. But first off, let's talk about the meta. So, we haven't really heard your thoughts on it. Do you think that Knights of the Frozen Throne is really that bad of an expansion?
well, there's quite a big outcry at the moment from the community. Understandably so, I guess. Druid is just by far the most prevalent class, and I
Mm,
think one of the other reasons why currently Knights of the Frozen Throne is receiving a lot of hate from the community is the fact that decks that were so strong in previous expansions are still very powerful. If we look at the latest Data Reaper reports, we can see that Token Shaman, Pirate Warrior, Murloc Paladin, and Token Druid are all decks that excelled in the Ungoro meta.
mm,
And even now, coming into the Knights of the Frozen Throne meta, I think a lot of people are like, oh yeah, we'll get new decks and lots of new stuff, maybe a control meta type things. These decks are seeing the most play and also the most powerful across the board. Now, I think that there's something that people are overlooking here, and that's the fact that it was impossible, or at least in my opinion, for us to get a meta as nice as the Ungoro meta. I personally loved Ungoro. I played it right the way through. I didn't get bored of it at all. From the beginning to the end of Ungoro, I was enjoying myself trying new decks. In fact, I think even in the last like 2 weeks of the season, we were still seeing new decks, like new ways, new modifications of decks popping up here and there, and that was
yeah,
really cool. But the thing is, something that people are forgetting, and people hyped up a lot about this, is that we didn't have the rotation now. So
yeah,
going into the Angora meta, we had the rotation, right? We had sorry, I'm a bit sick. We had all the old cards going out. What
yeah. Year of the
sets were
Kraken into the Year of the Mammoth. That
yeah?
standard
Which sets were
rotation.
rotated?
Blackrock Mountain and the Grand
Oh,
Tournament.
TGT.
Yeah, Blackrock Mountain and the Grand Tournament. Those are the
Yeah.
two sets that were
Oh yeah,
rotated.
and LOE.
Oh, and League of Explorers. Yeah,
Yeah, and those are like really big, impactful expansions,
yeah. Mm.
especially League of Explorers with cards like Elise, Reno Jackson, Sir Finley, etc. Like a lot of big cards in those, and even in Grand Tournament. Okay, Grand Tournament less successful, but Blackrock Mountain certainly a very big class. I mean, expansion decks
Yeah.
like Dragon Priest or Dragon Warrior. All these decks kind of disappeared, and so we came into Angoro, fresh decks. Everyone had to play new things, right? Forced to.
And there was
And I
also
think,
the Hall of Fame changes as well, which made a
oh
big
yeah, yeah,
difference, you
like
know.
so
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Very big. And I think going into Knights of the Frozen Throne, people kind of just have this expectation like, oh yeah, Girl was so great. We want another expansion where we can just make up a whole new thing. And I kind of feel like, I mean, I definitely don't think the meta is good right now. I think I mean, I haven't been playing Hearthstone as long as many of the big names, but in the time that I've played, I'd say we're in quite a bad meta right now. But at the same time, I think that it's not as bad as people are perceiving it to me. I don't think it was ever going to be as good as Ungoro. I think that's
Mm.
impossible. And the other thing is, I think that we will see a nerf. I'm not going to get too into the whole Druid debate, but I'm sure we'll see a nerf within 2 to 3 months from now. And I think that's going to fix it. And we're going to get a whole new meta. We have had a bit of meta shakeup. We see decks like Quest Mage making an appearance. Um, but there definitely is this problem of old decks still being strong. But I just think people need to maybe lay off a bit on the hate. Maybe just hold out a bit longer, you know? I'm not sure what your thoughts on that are.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right in that people are very much underestimating the effect of the rotation. It's not something we've seen that much in Hearthstone. We've seen it in other card games like Magic the Gathering, for instance, where the rotations used to happen more frequently, and like they do have a large impact. People kind of forget that there's so many cards moving out that leave a real void in the way you can
Yeah.
play, and that really sort of remove a lot of archetypes, and that we didn't really have with this Knights of the Frozen Throne meta. I think ultimately, like Druid is still in a bad place where it is oppressing a
Yeah,
lot of the
definitely.
other deck ideas, and a lot of other possibilities. And that is something that hopefully they will deal with, possibly after the summer playoffs, which are happening
Yeah,
over the next few weeks. Maybe
I think
before the
that's
championship. That's going to be
well.
the debate. It's either going to be before the championship after the playoffs or after the championship itself.
So I think it'll be. It's definitely going to be after the playoffs. Um,
Yeah.
the prelims. There's no chance that it'll be before then. I think it's already too late. I think they would have had to announce the nerf at least 2 weeks ago, I think.
Yeah, deck
Um,
submissions for Europe are tomorrow, so
yeah, and it would have really hit the pro scene, announcing a nerf like this just because they put in tons of hours and it would just be unfair to them. So I think they have
yeah.
taken that into consideration. I do think though that they're gonna make a big change before the championship because it's like the image of the game is very important. And if we see the same decks in the spring championship that we saw
Well, the
that
same
we've
decks in
that
summer
we've
that we saw in spring.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, yeah, yeah. Same next and something that we saw in spring. I think it's just going to have a really negative impact on the competitive scene as a whole. The other thing I'd like to touch on is just the fact that currently the top decks, as I said, were Pirate Warrior, Token Shaman, Token Druid, and Murloc Paladin, and these were, as I said,
And
the
Jade Shaman.
like
I mean
the
Jade Druid.
Jade Druid as well, but less so than the others, right? Like what I'm going to get to now is that like, those are the best decks, but the other thing is Jade Druid is just in such a powerful place right now. When you queue into Jade, you don't know if it's Token or Jade, right?
Yeah,
They're
when you queue
both
into
very
Druid, yeah.
strong decks, and this has a very big impact on ladder, and
Hmm.
it also has a very big impact in tournaments. So I'm not sure if you want to maybe talk about that a little bit,
Yeah.
but it has a very big impact because you can't really because both Druid decks are so strong right now, you can't really plan to try soft counter one type of Druid deck in a tournament environment, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
And at high level ladder legend or high level legend ladder, it is the one thing we've seen players do quite a bit is actually instead of queuing a different deck to counter queue your opponent, you just queue the different druid. Because
Yeah,
if you mulligan incorrectly for the wrong druid, because your mulligans against Jade Druid and your mulligans against an aggro token druid are
completely
very,
different.
very different. So
Yeah.
with any given deck, if you mess up that mulligan, it can really negatively affect your win rate. I think that's definitely something that's inflating the druid win rates when it comes to like the stats we see from like Vicious Syndicate a little bit. It's probably definitely inflating it. If the Jade Druid is seen as the more popular one, then more people are going to mulligan towards against that. And then when it's aggro Druid, well, that deck actually gets a little bit of a boost now because people are mulliganing worse against it. So that is
Yeah.
definitely something to consider. And like one of the things you used to be able to do in the old mulligan style, where you could you know
Oh, wait
see
out.
as your opponent. Yeah, you could kind of wait it out and try and make a read from that. But obviously, at high level legend, that wouldn't have made a difference as nobody was going to wait it out anyway. Or both players would have just waited it out. I mean,
Yeah, both players would have waited
yeah,
out.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it is definitely a problem. Just the fact that there's like so much druid as well. It's not just that there's one oppressive deck, right? It's that there's so much druid that's like powerful. People have been comparing it a lot to Undertaker Hunter, and because that's
Yeah.
where it's like, oh, druid has broken Undertaker Hunter, but it's not like it's like druid as a
It's not
whole,
broken.
but it's like
It's just
half. But it's like half token druids, half jade druids, and
yeah,
then
they're,
like,
they're on
uh,
opposite ends of the spectrum, right?
yeah,
So like you've got the Jade Druid that's beating every control deck, right? Jade Druid isn't allowing for control decks. It's actually beating up on mid-range decks these days. I really don't
yeah.
want to get too centered focused on the Druid thing, but it is an issue. And then you've got Token Druid, which beats up on all the other decks, like all the mid-range decks, right?
Or all the
Um,
aggro decks, ideally, except
Oh
Token
yeah, and
Shaman.
also and yeah, the aggro decks. But you know what I mean? Like they do two completely different things, and you can't counter one without just losing to the other, right? Like Quest Mage is okay. Not really going by the dot here because I don't think that deck's played optimally. But Quest Mage is a relatively good counter versus Jade Druid, but it's just absolutely terrible versus Token Druid, right? And Control Warrior would be good versus Token Druid, but it's just terrible versus Jade Druid. And you've got this issue where they just like one class is so powerful and it can do too many things.
Yeah, I mean, the best matchup I think to look at really is Murloc Paladin. That's a deck
Yeah,
that's good against Jade Druid and bad against the Token Druid, as long as the Token Druid's especially playing Hungry Crabs. That's the card that makes the matchup even worse there. So, I think that's really the one. Like Paladin is the one that really sits in the middle of those two decks of being good against the one and bad against the other. So that can make your life very difficult and also kind of changes your mulligans a lot of the time as well. Like against
yeah,
a Token Druid, you wouldn't want to keep War Leader. Maybe against a Jade Druid, you might, or something like that. There's obviously some cards that change in those matchups, and obviously that does affect the win rates of Druid. But yeah, the point I was really trying to make is it's not really like Undertaker Hunter. If anything, it's more like the Shaman meta we had a while ago when there
yeah.
was
The mid range
yeah, mid-range and
shaman
aggro
and
Shaman
different.
both being really
Yes, is it?
powerful.
No,
Uh,
yes, that's 100%.
yeah, it was more like that in the sense that there was two or more than one powerful archetype in a class, and it made it really uncomfortable to play against on ladder. Firstly, because you didn't know how to mulligan, and with those decks in particular, you didn't even know after a few turns which one it was. You didn't
Yeah,
know whether to play around Lightning Storm or not for a few turns,
yeah.
and that's
You only
not
found
quite
out
the
after they played something late.
yeah, that's not quite the case with the Druids. Usually, if they pass turn one, it's most likely they're going to be Jade Druid or something a little bit slower than the aggro token Druid. But the meta is a bit of a problem. I mean, think like stepping away from the Druid issue, as kind of the main point I think you were wanting to make was more about the rotations and how that's kind of an
Yeah. Sorry.
underestimated impact on the meta. I think that's definitely true. I just think that to a certain extent that has been a little bit overshadowed by the Druid thing, but
Yeah.
maybe once we see some fix on that side, we'll really get to see it. But ultimately, as you say, it's not like decks like Token Shaman are going away. If anything, the deck has gotten a lot of support. Cards like Saronite Chain Gang, Thrall, Deathseer. Like these are all cards that theoretically support the archetype. We've seen the same with the Paladin. Like the mid-range paladin's also gotten support with the righteous protector. A lot of
Bone.
these decks have actually been getting, yeah, a lot of these decks have actually been getting a lot of support as well, because that
Uh,
is really the way that they are building, right? They're not looking to invent completely new archetypes every expansion. To be realistic, they don't have enough cards in an expansion to always do that, so they're trying to grow certain archetypes and grow ones that are already developed, add like a little bit to them, and then also grow new ones from
yeah.
underdeveloped shells. I
I
mean,
just
yeah,
I think that the whole Druid issue has just limited the creative space in which you can build decks. It's relatively easy to create decks that counter Token Shaman. So even though Token Shaman got support, I can build an Zoth Paladin that will beat Token Shaman at least 60% of the time. You know what I mean?
yeah,
Or a Control Paladin of some sort, or a Control Warrior. I'm gonna go back to the Control Warrior because it saw some success in the early stage of the expansion before people were like, oh, whoa, Jade Druid is this amazing thing. You know what I mean?
yeah,
And even like the Control Warlock, and the Jade Druid is kind of just it's kind of hidden these things away. So what I think that if people are listening, what something that you should just keep in mind is that Knights of the Frozen Throne, the cards are actually, I think they're a great success. And if we can just look at the first few days of the expansion, because the cards they released are good, and I think they incentivize really cool deck building, and the Death Knights are really cool and creative, and there's a lot of space there that can be used, and it's gonna be a very very interesting space to see what they once they implement some sort of nerf or after the next rotation. But I think there's a lot of room for creativity there, and I think it's going to be a really great time once they fix this issue. Overall, I think Knights of the Frozen Throne, the set itself is a success, but I think the fact that we're in this meta now and the results of the cards being released is just a bit unfortunate.
yeah. I think you're right. I mean, I think Death Knights have done a lot of where quests didn't really. Quests there was really only two viable quests for a very long time, being the Rogue and Warrior one, and obviously the Rogue one got nerfed to not really being viable now. Quest Mage is kind of viable, but the point being that the Death Knights just have a lot of more like leniency, because you don't have to build your whole deck around them. They've been a lot more successful. And really, when you
Yeah,
have these like flashy legendaries that are like a major portion of the the theme you're trying to push for your set, I think it's much better card design when you can make those playable. I mean, you can pretty much play any of the Death Knights if you happen to get them. You can find a deck to put them in. You don't have to build your entire deck around them. I mean, if you look at most of the Druid decks, they're not really, none of them are built around Malfurion, but it's a very good card
Yeah,
and it works in kind of everything. Um, and yeah, so like a lot of the Death Knights, they can kind of just fit in everywhere. Even Frost's
yeah.
Jaina, which I think is probably one of the weakest, has kind of seen a bit of play in like an
Because you can
elemental
just ping,
mage.
right? It just makes your ping that much better. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, it's a very good point to make. The Death Knights are good standalone cards. I'd say the only build around Death Knight is maybe the warrior one, but even then the weapon is just such a powerful effect, and that actually
Mm.
no, it's not really a build around because the hero power is so strong in itself.
Yeah, and I mean you have a
Yeah,
choice on the hero power. It's not like you have to use it to damage your own minions, right? You can use it only when you're
yeah,
behind on board, let's say, or use it to facilitate better use
yeah.
of your
They
weapon,
all
those
give
kind of things.
they all give some kind of build around potential. Like we look at the paladin one, and you can be like, oh, you can do auction master beardo things, or the priest one, maybe you can work out some kind of big OTK with the hero power. But then they also just have good effects, like the priest battle cry, the paladin weapon battle cry, very strong.
Yeah.
Like they have these good effects in battle cries. But I think we've talked quite a lot about this. I don't know if you want
Yeah, I
to
mean, I think just touching
interject.
on, I think the priest one, Anduin, is probably the most actual successful build around one. That's the one that's really
Oh
seen a
yeah,
lot of play in the Kazakus decks, or Razakis decks as they're being called because of the Raza and Anduin, Shadow Reaper Anduin synergy. So there are also, build around options for them. Where if you want to, you
yes,
can, and
yeah,
that's what makes a really good card like that, right? Where it can be good by itself, but also can be good in the build around. So I think I agree with you that a lot of the card design has been pretty solid from Knights of the Frozen Throne.
yeah, definitely,
There's also some
definitely.
good budget options. You mentioned cards like Bone Mare. These are cards that are also making things viable for budget players in any kind of deck. So, and Lich King, we got a good neutral, a high mana neutral drop, which is pretty good, which is also nice to
And it
see.
does
So,
something.
yeah,
That's good because we haven't seen a big drop, neutral drop that does something in a while.
yeah, yeah. Especially with
It's
Ragnaros Fire Lord
yeah,
being rotated out. So, yeah, I think overall, it is like a really good set in terms of card design and stuff like that. It's just there's some glaring meta issues at the moment that need to be sorted out. But yeah, but one scene where that can be a little bit different is the tournament scene, and what we saw over the weekend at Gamescom was the Hearthstone Global Games finals. So there was four nations taking part in the finals. First off, Ukraine played South Korea, managing to beat them to make it through to the finals, and the Czech Republic played America in what was a very, very close game, managing to take that one to get through the finals to make it an all-European final, which is
yeah, EU
yeah,
best.
EU best region. And Czech Republic, even though they were kind of the underdogs in a way, like all of their players are well known within the pro scene, but the standout they don't have as many, let's say, standout names, as Ukraine, which has Nyria, Kalento, Dr. Hippie, and then like Nick Chip as their sort of underdog name, and is also a pretty well known player amongst the pro scene. So I think for non people that aren't active in the pro scene, they probably knew the Ukraine team a lot better, and I mean that's where my vote went. But ultimately, the Czech Republic was able to actually win the series and win the Hearthstone Global Games, which I think is a great feat for them. And without sort of saying that it was largely one person's job. I mean, they did seem to indicate that Stan Sifka was largely responsible for the deck
Yeah,
building, and whilst maybe the decks weren't necessarily like as innovative as we sometimes see from Stan Sifka, that's actually a good sign that he can rein himself in sometimes, as sometimes he can be a bit too wacky with some of the things he brings to tournaments. And it really shows his understanding for what is a new format to most of these players. They've been playing it for quite a few weeks. This has been a very, very long tournament, but I think it's a really good indication from, uh, for the Czech Republic that Stan Sivka did a lot of really good work with the lineup preparation and sort of deck building. And I think that's one of the most interesting things about HGG for me.
the lineup.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, it did create a lot of hype. There was a lot of people in that Gamescom tavern. And they had that, the Lich King raid that was going on at the same time. So it's good to see Blizzard having more events like that. Great of them to time HGG to fit at Gamescom. Gamescom has held some really, really big esports tournaments in the past. Like the Dota's first international was at Gamescom. Uh, and yeah, I mean, I think the first wasn't the first Hearthstone at Gamescom as well, or was that always at been? No, I think it's always been at BlizzCon.
I have
Uh,
no clue. I wasn't playing then. No.
yeah, yeah. Anyway, so that I think the whole tournament as a whole was pretty cool. It would be nice to see some African representation next time, and not
Yeah.
just the rest of the world. But I mean, we can kind of understand why there wasn't
Yeah.
really any African representation due to, not enough HCT points from any of the real players and like, countries as a whole in Africa, that is.
I saw RDU posting a screenshot of his pick of Czech, and he was just like, Stancifka's a really good pick in the when a new expansion comes out because he's good at working out the best decks early in. And I think uh, not to take anything away from Czech and San Francisco, but I think that perhaps if we saw a little bit of a murkier meta, we would have seen a lot more innovation from Stan.
Yeah.
Because I mean, we did just see some of the best decks being played. Okay, they did play Big Priest, which is a very interesting off meta pick, and it certainly paid off. It won them the final match, as far as my understanding is. I didn't actually catch a lot of HGG. I mean, I saw enough to get the gist of it. Um, but yeah, I mean, we saw a few things like that, like the Big Priest. But overall, the meta was just kind of normal. And as you said, it's good that even the pros who like to try wacky things are able to kind of keep to themselves, like make sure that they do play the optimal things even when it's not necessarily in their nature. We saw a similar thing with Standard Dutchy in the winter playoffs.
Yeah.
Standard Dutchy's always in the past has been this player who's tried interesting things. He actually made the Malygos rogue that Pavel won last year's World Champs with. I know I'm digressing a bit here, but
Yeah.
even then, in the winter playoffs in the beginning of this year, we saw a similar thing where when in interview he was just like, I have to just play the best decks now. I can't try my own things. It's just not going to win. And I think now going into HGG, Stancifka came to a similar conclusion. He has to play the best decks. He has no choice. And it just is what's good right now.
Yeah, and in
Uh,
HGG's case as well, he has his whole team relying on him, right? It's not just
yeah.
a personal thing as well. He can't just do it for improving his name or, making himself more recognized. I mean, it's good to see, those kind of professional attitudes as we're sort of hoping to improve Hearthstone sort of esports as a whole, with more like events like this. And from Blizzard's side as well, it's good to see them organizing extra events. I mean, I think HCG appealed a lot more to the casual audience more than the professional community. A lot of the early rounds, in particular, where they had players from other countries that I would say were
Yeah,
playing
it's
far
exciting.
less than optimally, and maybe doing a bit better than they should have as well, you could say, and some countries doing a lot worse than you would have expected them to. It definitely, I think, it generated a lot of hype, even though maybe
Yeah.
a lot in the pro community weren't watching it as closely.
On that note, on the in the early stages with more countries playing, I think it's also good because people can kind of get behind their country.
Yeah,
It doesn't matter if your favorite player is in America or in the UK or in Ukraine or in Czech Republic. You know, in the early stages, I'm pretty sure everyone was just like, rooting for their country. If I'm from USA, I'm voting for USA. Unfortunately, okay, South Africans, we had this choice of like, okay, who do we want to, where are our pros, like our
yeah,
favorite pros, who are we voting for here? But I think it does create a lot of kind of like unity within the community in certain groups, which is very cool. If you're in Spain, you can support the Spanish team. If you're in Bulgaria, you can support the Bulgarian team. And that's very, very cool to see. And these community events are very cool. Like we see Blizzard are doing a lot more of these community things. This year was just the beginning. HGG was the beginning. They did the Wild tournament, which was more,
hmm
very inclusive, trying to get the whole community in. And now we've also just heard about I'm not sure if you saw the Tavern versus Tavern tournament.
yeah, for the like the players that get or the taverns that get the fireside beta thing, right? It's for those
No,
taverns.
no, no. So it's a new thing coming out. This is also kind of tying into this whole like getting the community together, really growing the esports scene, and also at the same time bringing the Hearthstone community together. And this is a very cool thing. My details, what I'm saying might be a little bit off track, but basically what's going to be happening is this season it's only going to be going in through North America, but they are implementing a system where if you go to a fireside gathering, your tavern, your fireside, you can create a tavern team, and that's 4 players, and you compete against another tavern. And there's going to be a whole tavern tournament, kind of like a mini HGG in a way, but tons more teams because it's every single fireside will have a tavern team, and there's going to be a tournament, and then the final 4 teams, I think, go to BlizzCon and they actually play at BlizzCon. And this is just another
Yeah,
really
yeah,
cool
yeah,
way
I
to
did.
get, like, from a grassroots level, growing Hearthstone as an esport, which is very important, especially when Hearthstone is it's one of the top esports, but at the same time, it does struggle to, keep its footing as an esport.
Yeah, and what they've done as well, the next Hearthstone World Championships is not actually going to be at BlizzCon, right? It's going to be
Yeah,
in January next
2018.
year as well.
Mm.
So that's quite important because what that kind of means is they need to fill the Hearthstone gap at BlizzCon in terms of, let's say, some competitive stuff to show. They've got the stage space that they need to fill, and that
Yeah.
is also why they've got these, tavern versus tavern kind of tournaments and other things. Like maybe they'll have another wild thing that'll tie in with BlizzCon, you know? They've
Mm.
got time to still figure that out. So they're definitely going to have more events that are tying in with BlizzCon, and that at least gives the different events time to get that BlizzCon stage spotlight, which is cool, and different players to get it as well. I'm sure, for all those players, to actually go and play on the BlizzCon stage, even if you're not aspiring to be a professional, is definitely something they're gonna look forward to doing if they can make that top four in the Tavern versus Tavern thing. So, yeah, it is good to see them focusing a lot more on the community side of things, and that is definitely something that Blizzard as a whole have been doing across most of their games. But obviously, we're focused on the Hearthstone side of things. But unless you have anything else to add, I think that's pretty much all we have for this week. Uh, there's not really much else to discuss. The only other major news is the new wing coming out, but Pandemonium and I will do a separate video discussing that, going into some more detail and tips and strategies. So keep an eye out for that. But otherwise, nothing else from you.
No, nothing to say.
Okay,
More
well,
nonsense.
that's all we have then for Magma Ragers episode 27. You can find us on Twitter, Zamok at Zamok underscore HS on Twitter, myself at dib underscore gaming, and you can also like like the video on YouTube, follow, subscribe, do all those kind of things that help the channel grow. And also feel free to give us any feedback. Maybe you want to disagree with Zaymok and his analysis of the meta. Well, you can find him on Twitter and tweet at him there. And you can do the same for me. And yeah, thanks a lot for listening, watching. Cheerio.
Cheers.